Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of the most compelling characters in modern fantasy, Kaladin Stormblessed. But look, we aren't just going to rehash his epic spear fights or his military tactics. Instead, we're peeling back the layers for a psychological study of the guy. We're going to look at Kaladin's journey completely through the lens of trauma and see how he totally redefines what it means to be a hero.
So let's kick things off with a pretty massive paradox. Why does the absolute most powerful warrior on Roshar genuinely believe he's a total failure? To figure that out, we have to look past the physical battles and focus on the battles happening inside his own head. Because really, Kaladin is a man in a constant, grinding fight against clinical depression and crushing survivor's guilt.
There's a huge contrast to consider here. On one hand, you've got your traditional fantasy hero. You know the type. They fight for glory, they completely brush off the horrors of war, and they just kind of accept casualties as part of the job. But then you have Kaladin, the trauma-informed hero. He absolutely does not fight for glory. He fights out of sheer, desperate necessity. He is driven by this consuming need to protect people, and he's quite literally haunted by the guilt of surviving when others don't. This core difference is the psychological foundation for everything we're about to unpack.
Section 1. The burden of protection and how it shapes Kaladin's identity.
When you look at Kaladin's chronological timeline, his descent is just steep and incredibly tragic. He starts out so full of hope as a surgeon's apprentice, learning to heal. But then, to protect his brother, he pivots to becoming a soldier in Amaram's army. And despite his literal battlefield brilliance, what does he get? He gets brutally betrayed, branded as a slave, and reduced to a suicidal bridgeman. It's not just a list of bad things happening, it shows how the rigid hierarchical society of Roshar systematically stripped away his humanity and broke him down into a disposable commodity.
But to really understand why he takes this dark path, we have to go back to a specific memory of his younger brother, Tien. 3 are stronger than 1, right? Kaladin swore to protect him, and Tien's death becomes the foundational trauma of Kaladin's entire life. It's this fragmented memory that drives literally everything he does. It creates this agonizing internal tug-of-war between his own vulnerability and a suffocating sense of responsibility that he just cannot let go of.
Moving into Section 2, Betrayal and the Chasm, the Shattering of Trust.
Okay, the reality behind the Shosh brand on Kaladin's forehead is absolutely devastating. Looking at the canonical facts of the text, General Amaram actually slaughtered Kaladin's remaining squad for one reason: to steal their shards. And then he had the nerve to frame it as an act of patriotism. It was just a sickening, self-serving manipulation of Alethi's social codes. This betrayal is the canonical event that completely cements Kaladin's absolute hatred of the Light Eyes and solidifies his nightmare reality as a slave. Now, while his enslavement is canonical text, the reader community has brought forward some really profound psychological interpretations of how he behaves afterward. As fans have pointed out, Kaladin shows severe, textbook signs of clinical depression and PTSD. His brooding, sometimes prickly nature isn't just your standard moody fantasy trope. It's a deeply realistic portrayal of the human condition. I mean, the guy hasn't had a shred of therapy or a real support system. He's just been sinking deeper and deeper into despair.
Which brings us to a massive turning point in the story. How does a completely broken man learn to lead again? Well, everything shifts at the honor chasm. Kaladin is literally standing on the edge, ready to end it all. And then, a little spren named Syl brings him a poisonous blackbane leaf. She mistakenly thinks it's something precious that might make him feel better. And you know what? That tiny, misunderstood gesture of genuine care is exactly what pulls him back from the brink.
Section 3, Transforming Bridge 4, and his rebirth as leader.
It's fascinating how Kaladin instinctively falls back on the Alethi codes of war to rebuild the shattered humanity of his crew. He forces readiness by making them wear vests constantly. He inspires them by shouldering the heavy planks himself to project strength. He shows incredible restraint by taking brutal beatings just to keep them out of trouble. He quite literally leads from the absolute front of the bridge, and he proves his honor by spending whatever meager resources he has left on the injured men. He uses this rigid military structure to actually hand them back their dignity.
So the real takeaway here is the why rather than the how. Kaladin survived because he fundamentally shifted his mindset. He went from just sitting around waiting to die in misery to actively making the choice to prolong and enrich the final days of his men. By pouring all his energy into caring for them, he inadvertently turned Bridge 4 into the safest, most disciplined crew on the entire Shattered Plains. It's a total game changer.
Section 4, Syl and the Bond, a look at their symbiotic relationship.
Let's take a second to compare two of the most famous Radiant dynamics. Look at Shallan and Pattern. They're super conversational, very scholarly, always talking about lies and human nature. But Kaladin and Syl, they are entirely different. Their bond is fiercely action-oriented. Syl isn't drawn to Kaladin because of what he says, she's drawn to him because of what he does. She bonded him because despite everything, he continually chooses to act with honor.
I love how the fan community grounds their relationship in real-world mental health dynamics. As readers have noted, when Kaladin gets severely depressed, he just shuts down completely and goes nonverbal. And Syl, she's right there next to him. She's fluttering around, she's worried, she wants to help but doesn't quite know how. It is such a perfect mirror for how a depressed person might isolate themselves, while a true friend just sits there in the dark with them, offering that silent, nonverbal emotional support.
Honestly, it's beautifully summed up by a popular fan analogy. Kaladin is basically an introvert with clinical depression who just happened to get adopted by a fiercely caring extrovert. Yes, Kaladin can be terse and sometimes even seem dismissive, but their dynamic is absolutely not toxic. It's raw, it's deeply loving, and it is wonderfully realistic for two beings trying to navigate heavy trauma together.
Section 5. The Windrunner Ideals as Psychological Milestones.
The magic system here is wild because every single step or ideal actually forces Kaladin to confront his own mind. The first ideal is all about his recommitment to life back at the chasm. Then, the second ideal forces him to rebuild his ethical code by vowing to protect those who cannot protect themselves, like we saw with Dalinar at the tower. But that third ideal? Wow, that one requires him to process his core trauma. He has to finally accept the terrifying ambiguity of failure and admit out loud that he just cannot save everyone.
And academic analysis actually backs this up wonderfully. Catherine Morrison over at Texas Tech University points out that the author uses these ideals as a literal mechanism to force Kaladin to confront his repressed memories. I mean, to swear these oaths, Kaladin almost goes into a state of hypnosis where he has to face the trauma of his past and completely reframe it. His past stops being a source of shame and instead becomes the very foundation of his heroism. It's brilliant.
Finally, Section 6. Redefining true protection and the ongoing struggle.
You know, the main reason Kaladin resonates so deeply with so many readers is that his depression isn't just magically cured by getting superpowers. He never reaches this definitive, perfect state of being healed. Instead, his whole journey is about a continuous presence of healing. He's just learning, day by day and step by step, how to communicate better, how to cope with his mental illness, and how to carry this massive burden without letting it completely crush him.
So I want to leave you all with a final thought to chew on. If true heroism is found in our ongoing struggle to heal, rather than in never being broken in the first place, how does that change the way we view our own daily battles? Kaladin shows us that being broken definitely doesn't disqualify you from being a hero. Actually, it might be the exact thing that gives you the strength to protect others. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.